Actually, the only one that currently lives in the States right now is Jay. Just wondering, maybe you can start this off with what's going on, or at least in your area, and what are you seeing? Um, yeah, because last time we talked, I think it wasn't too bad. I'm just curious about um, if any of the protests or anything has picked up around your area.
Well, what you see in the media is a whole lot of protesting, and it's still some of it looks kind of crazy, because that, of course, that's what the media would really focus on. For the most part, my observation is a lot of people have taken to marching in the streets and trying to engage in some sort of like conversation or public demonstration that says that advocating for Black Lives Matter, advocating for racial justice, advocating for really for us in America and perhaps around the world to think in different ways. For racism to exist, it requires power, privilege, and prejudice. Those are the three elements that need for it to exist. And most isms that do exist that creates a disparity between one person and another requires some formula of power, privilege, and prejudice. And so in the United States, the conversation about race has been always a difficult one, a very sensitive one. It's almost as if people don't want to see themselves as the bad guys. It's as if this whole movement has said that, hey, a good portion of America, you're really the empire. You're not the rebellion like in Star Wars. You're the other guys. You're Vader and Palpatine in the original trilogies. Um, and and so it always comes as a paradigm shift, the shock when people hear that. These are necessary conversations, but at the same time, um, we also need to strive for truth telling and a way to move forward in terms of healing. It requires a lot of listening for those who are in the position of who have positions of power. Now, power is a weird thing because it's not the same in every context. And given a context, like for example, like being Igorot amongst Filipinos, where's the power? Sometimes it varies. If we're the one teaching the dances, then we got a little bit of power there. But a lot of times, it goes back to these old weird narratives about like, hey, aren't you the people with tails? And why are you so light skinned? I thought you guys were all dark. I'm like, oh my gosh, we are so diverse as a people. And so these are questions then about recognizing human people's dignity and recognizing people for who God created them to be. And that's a hard thing because I think that people naturally need to categorize things. It helps people make sense of the world. And we do this in many ways unconsciously. Now, the danger, of course, is when it begins to describe a person as less than human or less than what value people less than what they are. So I see these conversations happening in the United States. I serve in the church, so I see this. I serve in the United States Army, so I see this conversation happen in different ways. I in this COVID time, you can't really meet with people, but you just see so many things happening, and people are definitely trying to participate in a way to advocate for change. Now, I think what's wacky is that when young people say stuff like, wow, this is the first time in the whole world, history of the world, that something like this has happened. No, that's not true. This has happened a lot of times throughout the history of the world. There have been times when people come to the tipping point of gaining a new consciousness. It's almost like, a moment of deep spiritual revelation. And these are one of those moments, and it seems that it coincides. I think the fact that it coincides with coronavirus, that's no coincidence. In fact, coronavirus helped this conversation because it's given people opportunity to be more reflective. And most people are not comfortable with the silence and the isolation of what this COVID has brought. So now that there's an opportunity to have something where you could literally fight against it has brought together a certain reflective consciousness in people to say, hey, yeah, these things are really wrong. Racism is wrong. How we treated black and brown people, well, we need to evaluate that. The powers that are given to police officers, we need to think about, what it means, to have police who protect and serve, and what their roles are, so that they could truly be people of the community. And so the all these conversations are happening right now at the same time, and we have space for it because, well, most of us are sheltering in place, kind of, sorta. There's now a spike over here in the United States and in many of our regions now because of this, but it's opening up places for people to be challenged with conversation, to confront what sometimes we call what a lot of like progressive folks would say is like the unconscious biases. But really, it's just growing in awareness. I mean, these are just fancy academic words that really say, yeah, it's just helping us grow in the awareness of who we are, how we're truly interconnected. But anyways, what I find is that it's opening up a lot of conversation, and these aren't new conversations, but I think more people are able to engage it, and being triggered by what happened to George Floyd and how awful that was. You're watching essentially a lynching, something that you see this video and it's lasting like 9 minutes of a person whose breath is slowly being taken away from them. Crazy. And that's different than a gunshot. Very fast. And that's awful too. But when you see that happening, and just how, wow, the dude over there who's standing over him, putting his hand in his pocket, looking like he was like God and stuff, like, dude, that's not right. And people see this and they're yearning for justice. Now, we sometimes can fall into the mistake of thinking that justice is like revenge and retribution. I think that we definitely kind of like sometimes mix that up. But justice is really truly about a restoration of who we are together, a restoration of of trying to make peace with the wholeness of who we are and accepting who others are. And these are all challenging things. This requires a lot of kind of honest conversation. And so for me, I'm really, really interested to see how ready and willing our people are to get into it. Because right now, it's kind of like, it looks like it's the thing to do. But sometimes when the conversation gets really hard, because that requires, you have to look inside yourself now. That can be, and it's easy because you see people pointing. Yeah, hey, that dude's the more racist. That's super, you can see the finger pointing happening. But you have to look in here, and this is where the true healing will happen. This is where the openness will happen. But that's work. That's really work. If we can look beyond the skin, that's outside, and look to who we are inside, we will get somewhere. So, anyways, I find it really like that. I think there's a lot of good things that are happening if we look for it. That's what I've noticed in America, and the voices of people who have generally been marginalized or ignored, or are at least being listened to. And so for those people who recognize that they are in a position of power, this is the time to listen. This is the time to pay attention. This is the time to just shut up and just lend your ear out there. And in that, when we learn the stories of other people, I truly believe this. When we learn the stories of other people in real meaningful ways, we develop a way to care for them. We develop a way to care, and hopefully that translates into systemic. But I always believe that the only way to deal with the systemic stuff outside of the legislature is you got to work on the individual's heart. And when you start working on that, then you're helping people become healthy. You're helping people become, light to the world. But it all starts with us. So anyways, that's what I'm observing in America. How about you guys?
Well, it's interesting because even before all this, as Canadians, we always hear about stories in the States of all of these issues. Personally, I didn't see a lot myself, but especially now, I'm still hearing a lot of stories where, yeah, it's definitely present for sure, and I guess it's a good thing that it's becoming mainstream for everybody to know that here. But yeah, even in terms of like protests and everything, I didn't even know we had one. I think when we were talking the other week, they were having one that day.
Yeah, yeah,
So I didn't even know. But yeah, just personally, it is nice to see that people are becoming more aware, and now it's people have kind of some motivation to do something about it and at least speak up and yeah, create both awareness and people can start thinking about it more. So yeah, I don't know if the same it's the same experience for you, Ido, but yeah, that's what I thought.
yeah. I knew there was like a huge protest happening, and a couple of my friends were there. A couple of my friends actually took photos there as well of the event and whatnot. My main thought of that was just like, whatever happened to social
Social distancing?
distancing?
Yeah, I know.
Right, yeah, and
I had the same thought.
the right, but I don't know of any like actual COVID cases being related to it, but I don't know at this point. I don't even trust the news anymore. But it's interesting because like most of the Canadian perspectives regarding this has always been very. The vocal voice has always been like of support from what I've experienced, and there's always this notion, and it's been like pretty widely circulated, in how there's like kind of not a backlash, but like a pushback against the whole idea of Canadians being nice and being exempt from all this racism that Americans experience. But there's a very popular opinion of like, no, that's not obviously the case, and which is true, right? Like, this whole podcast is about like, part of it is today talking about like our experiences of discrimination and whatnot. We'll talk about that later. But there's actually a special, like, what happened just today, I think, was there's a shooting by New Brunswick police, or New Brunswick RCMP, I think, of somebody. And then just this past week, there were a bunch of like people calling out cops, like Canadian cops, and a big one being like a First Nations chief that was assaulted by police. So definitely, from what I can tell from Canada, is that like there's a lot of people here that are definitely in support of BLM and like the whole protest and stuff. And I don't know if I mentioned it in our last podcast. I was like totally against riding and whatnot, or I was conflicted about it, and I still kind of am, because I don't I do not condone in rioting. I don't condone in looting, but at the same time, it's been basically like hammered towards me, or it's been hammered like the reason why this is happening. The reason why the riots in '92 were happening with Rodney King was because there's a lot of frustration, right?
Yeah.
So there's that aspect. So again, because and I think we were all in agreement on this, just because, especially because we're not of African American descent. Like, I personally feel that I don't really have an opinion, or I shouldn't have an opinion on whether or not something is right or wrong based on their experience. But just, I can only speak from my experience and what I can see and whatnot, right? But yeah, it's definitely like a tough issue, because like I'm sure all of us has experienced some form of discrimination. I mean, like, honestly, I can't even think of anything either, Gerald. But like, if I really had to dig back, I mean, I could think of experiences, but I personally don't put it into a lens where it's like oh, I'm such a victim and whatnot. But yeah, that's neither here nor there. What you, Mark?
Oh, me? Yeah.